I want to share with you something that I shared in short on Friday night. To really unpack a thought that I think is more and more important in our time than ever before. I believe one of you were there as I spoke, so indulge me for a few minutes and hopefully we can then explore it in a deeper way that we did on Friday night. The argument was as follows. We see that God, when he wants to create the human being, he first consults with angels. Na'aseh Adam. He consults with angels. Let us make man. When he wants to destroy Sodom, he consults with angels, with his Beth Din above, about destroying Sodom. Nerda, let us go down. Not me, let us. And Rashi tells us that the reason that it says it that way is because Hashem was there to teach us a lesson. And the lesson is to always have the humility to listen to somebody else's opinion, to consult. And you might say the mere fact that you're on a shiur right now and you're listening to the words of somebody other than yourself, then you already figured it out. You know the truth. And the truth is that you listen to somebody else's opinion. But forgive me for saying that that's not enough. Not that I want anybody to listen to me in a deeper way than they are currently. That's not my message. The message is the following. How many people in your life are able to tell you the truth in between your eyes, straight as an arrow? How many people do you respect enough and do you trust enough that you know that if they tell it to you, it's most probably coming from the best place within them, and that's what you need to hear? Because one of the biggest challenges we have as human beings is our defensiveness. We are so defensive. Right away, somebody tells us something and we start defending ourselves as if we're in a court of law. It's like we walk this globe, we walk our lives 24 hours a day, judging ourselves, literally placing ourselves in a courtroom, and then feeling the need to be our own prosecutor and our own defense attorney. So we'll say something to ourselves and then we'll start defending ourselves. And it's ironic. We are our own worst prosecutor. Nobody criticizes us the way we criticize ourselves. And we are our own biggest defense attorney. We're just defending ourselves the whole time. And what the natural response when somebody tells us something is defensiveness. It's almost universal. It's almost like a person's a psychopath if they don't get defensive. It's right away, like you're sitting at a meeting and you bring up an idea which is different than the other person's idea. Right away, they feel they have to defend their idea. In a marriage, the husband, the wife, they sit there saying, gosh, what happened today? Like, is everything fine? Like, it seems like things, what do you mean? You're like, okay. Even if they are attacking, why do you feel the need to go into defense? What's the worst that's going to happen if the attack goes right through you? The amount of energy we use in defensive ways is actually ridiculous. And it holds us back from hearing so much truth. As I've mentioned in the past, when I'll share an idea that's controversial, you just see people's blood draining from their face or rising to their face. They're either going pale or they're getting, dare he? Like this whole defense mechanism goes up, a wall goes up in front of them. I will not listen to this radical peanut brain rabbi from a different universe. He has nothing on me. He has nothing to say to me. What are you so defensive about? What are you defending? To use the analogy of a soccer court, what's your goal? In other words, what are you defending so much? Because in soccer, it's quite, interesting. A big part of the game is defending that and your space. And ultimately, the goalie's job is one thing and one thing only. Nothing passes by you. Nothing gets through you. And we often act like goalies. But what we don't realize is, excuse the soccer analogy if you're not soccer fans, but there's a thing in soccer called an own goal, that where a person, instead of knocking the ball into the other person's goal, they by mistake put in their own goal. It's called an own goal. In other words, sometimes you could be so defensive that maybe you're defending yourself from other people's goals and other people's ability to enter your court. But what you're doing is you're just scoring own goals. Just our defensiveness is so bad that we literally scoring our own goals and undermining our ability, undermining our ability for true greatness, undermining our ability to really have the impact we need on this world. So my question again is, who tells you the truth? Who's your truth sayer? So you might say, my 2-year-old. Fine, but that's not the truth. It doesn't take, it doesn't take tremendous humility to listen to the truth of a young child. Who really can sit across you and say it the way it is? Because we all need that. We all need an objective voice. So therefore, usually it shouldn't be a spouse. A spouse is not that kind of relationship. Sometimes a spouse has to be blind. As I think it was Jefferson who said, no, Benjamin Franklin. He said, date with 2 eyes open, and when you marry, close 1 eye. In other words, you don't have to see everything. So I wouldn't say that the right place is in marriage, although very often spouses do that to each other, which is not necessarily the best thing. Better to be blind and deaf in a marriage. Not deaf because you have to listen to the other person, but deaf from listening to stuff that you don't have to. Just be in denial. But somebody in your life that says it. Because you know what? We all consider ourselves good people. I mean, we're all good people, right? There's very few people that walk around thinking I'm a bad person. There's some people that maybe struggle from low self-esteem, but I haven't murdered anybody. Have you? Right? We're all good people. I think none of us on this group right now have ever killed. Definitely not intentionally. We're pretty good. We haven't beheaded anybody, haven't abused somebody, haven't beaten somebody, haven't stolen and so. Good people, right? So we walk around with this sense of, I'm pretty much on the path. I know what I'm doing. But do I? Do I? Because Hashem created us with a very unique personality, each and every one of us. We are blind to some of our mistakes. Adam karov etzel atzmai. A person is close to themselves. They are so close that they're unable, often, to have a bird's eye view. May my father forgive me for saying it. My father was a very good matchmaker. And he just had a knack for it. But the funny thing was that he really, in my opinion, and I think my siblings would agree, he definitely wasn't the most emotionally intuitive person that I've ever met. He struggled to develop an emotional relationship with people. He was a giving person, extremely giving, but he struggled emotionally. And I definitely can never see him in a different universe being a psychologist. There's a lot of other professions he could have taken up, but psychology definitely not one of them. I think he thought the whole thing was a farce. I don't think he ever sat across a psychologist, and if he did, he must have just sat there torturing himself for the hour. And yet he had the ability of just having a knack. Okay, this guy, this girl, let's set them up. And after having studied it for many years, just trying to make sense of it, because it was just such a paradox, eventually it came to me I might be wrong, but I feel that that was the truth. That it was actually his ability of not really getting people in such a deep way, a more bird's eye view that allowed him to match people. Because the more you get to know a person, the more you're locked into the universe, the more you forget the forest for the trees and you don't know what is a detail and what is a bigger picture. You lose your perspective on the whole person. My father was much more straightforward. Okay, yeah, that personality, this kind of family, that kind of family, let's set you up. A lot of times it didn't work, but he created hundreds and hundreds of shidduchim. And most people struggle to make two shidduchim in a life or three. He just had that knack. He just had that knack to not see. Because that's the gift of an objective voice. Most of us know ourselves, at least parts of ourselves, but we live within ourselves. We live within our universe. And we have a million narratives about ourselves. And some of the narratives are true and some of them are not true. And some of them are based in childhood and some of them based in adulthood. And some of them serve us and some of us don't serve us. But we're so locked into our lives that we rarely get a bird's eye view of our life. And that's why an objective voice is somebody who comes to you and says, 1 second, there's a pattern here. Do you not see the pattern? No, Rabbi, what pattern are you talking about? There's a pattern. It's like the kid who comes late to school. One day, another day, another day, each day with a different excuse. I got stuck on bubble gum. I didn't have pants to put on. My mother didn't serve me breakfast. My father, tripped down the stairs. Every day, another excuse. Eventually, the teacher looks at them and says, Johnny, you have such great excuses, but you know what? There's one fundamental problem. You just don't come on time. You don't want to be in school. That's the fundamental excuse. That means you're finding a lot of excuses to 50 different little things. But if you haven't showed up to school in 50 days on time, there's one big problem. You just don't want to be in school. Often we excuse ourselves. No, that's because that. And that's because of that. Really? Don't you see a pattern? No, because we're blind to our own patterns. We're blind to our own faults. That's the way we convince ourselves we're okay. Don't you realize you're addicted to your phone? You overeat. You drink a bit too much whiskey. You get into codependent relationships. Don't you realize you have a bit of an addictive personality? No, what addictive? I'm only close to them because. What do you mean? Why not? Of course, I love my sister. I love my brother. Of course, we're close. Don't you realize that there's like a pattern of behavior that repeats? And that's for me the gift of having an honest voice, because the honest voice can look at you and say, I hear all your excuses and they sound so valid, incredibly valid, but it's baloney. And only if I'm able to hear that am I ever able to truly grow. But most of us don't allow ourselves to hear the truth. We will do anything, and I mean anything, to avoid hearing the truth. We're like a bunch of Donald Trumps. Whatever you're going to think about the guy's policy, he's no longer president. Well, he thinks he is. He's the ultimate guy that doesn't exactly admit defeat and doesn't take criticism from anybody. He's the most defensive person on the planet. All he's doing the whole day is just attacking. And he may be an extreme version of it, but in many ways, I think we're all like that in some way. Just not willing to face the music and face our faults and just attack and attack. It's that person's fault. It's that person's fault. It's the marriage. It's the this. It's the boss's fault. You've been in 6 jobs in 10 years. Don't you see a pattern? No, what do you mean? This job, the business closed down. And this job, the boss was a real, schmendrick. And this job, just like the people were so obnoxious, it was crazy. And you're like, I hear all great excuses, but you've moved jobs 6 times in 10 years. That's a bit, no? Or you've tried to start 5 different businesses and each one of them has gone down the tubes and you've wasted a lot of money and a lot of other people's money on it. Don't you see a pattern in the way you're trying to be an entrepreneur? Something's off. No, what do you mean? It's just circumstance. Look, 90% of businesses never take off. Okay, but you're willing to admit you made, no, I didn't make any mistakes. I did it 100% by the book. What are you so defensive about? Why can't you sit and maybe you did fail? Maybe there is a problem. Maybe there is a negative pattern. Maybe it's not your spouse that's always wrong. Maybe you come to the table with something that's a problem. But you could only listen to this kind of stuff if you're comfortable enough in yourself to not be threatened to hear it. The problem is, as we said earlier, defensiveness. We are so terrified of having to acknowledge that we're not perfect, that we will do anything to defend against that attacker, that evil. How dare she, person who's going to attack me? Because I am so solid. I am rock solid. Some of the greatest sages would appoint somebody, what they would call a Musar Zugger, somebody who would say Musar, somebody who would tell them the truth between their eyes, bam. Because we all need them. All, no matter how pious or beautiful or fantastic or a good person you are not seeing certain stuff about yourself, which are hurting you and hurting the people around you. I've often said that one of the harshest evenings of my life was at a certain stage. I was maybe 19. I was 20 years old, and I was spending a year in Jerusalem, and I was just spiraling. I'd spent so many years waiting to get out of the official yeshiva system, and finally now I was somewhat out of the system, not formally, but somewhat, and I was spiraling. I was losing. I literally stood for nothing, and I'm not putting myself down. I really remember myself then. I actually didn't stand for anything other than trying to rebel and trying to find myself, but I remember one evening, a group of my friends who were with me in this location, and they saw how I was spiraling. It wasn't rocket science. They called me into a room. It was a tiny room, which was the office that we used in that yeshiva. It was a tiny room. 6 of them squeezed into the room. It was a Friday night, I think. And they lambasted me. Gosh, did they lambaste me. It's been more than 1.5 decades ago, and I remember that, did I hear it? Levi, you're losing the plot. Levi, do you see what's going on with you? Levi this, Levi that. And of course, at the beginning, I was defending. Eventually, all the evidence was laid out in front of me. I couldn't deny it. What a gift. I didn't change overnight. But that and other few harsh moments in the coming months changed me. When I realized, okay, Levi, you're gonna have to deal with the consequences of your actions, because you're not being responsible. You're not being responsible. And the scary thing is, so many of our issues we would be able to overcome if we allowed ourselves to acknowledge that we have issues. In other words, we underestimate how resilient we are. We would be able to deal with our stuff if we acknowledge that we had stuff. But we're so terrified of acknowledging because it means that we're lesser, I'm not good enough person. If I have to agree with you that I have an anger problem, or I have a resentment problem, or I have any other issues, then I'm not a good person. Well, you're a good person, but you have that issue. And you can overcome it, but stop resisting all day to hear it. We spend so much energy building walls, not to acknowledge the truth. But the truth is, once you know it, in the words of the great, it's a great statement from a Hasidic statement that says, knowing the sickness is half the cure in medicine, but more importantly, in our service of God and our humanity. Knowing the illness is half the cure. If you only acknowledge, I have a problem, I'm obnoxious, I'm narcissistic, I'm angry. Not I am angry, I have an anger problem, I have a narcissism problem, I have a resentment problem, I have a forgiveness problem, I have a kindness problem. I struggle to be kind. I have a listening problem. I struggle to listen to people and actually hear what they're trying to say. I have a defensiveness problem. If we just acknowledge that that is 50% of the solution, because these issues are surmountable. We can solve our stuff. We might not become from the narcissist to the most giving person on the planet, but we could soften the edges. We might not go from being an angry, volatile person to the most docile person on the planet. But if we acknowledge, okay, I have an anger problem, slowly but surely, I'll work on it. We spend too much energy denying our faults rather than spending the energy on bettering ourselves. If we could listen to the truths about us, we could advance so much in our lives. And that's why the sages say in Ethics of Our Father, Aseh l'charav, appoint for yourself a mentor. Have a mashpia, have somebody, a mentor. Somebody with a little more life experience, a little wisdom, who can look at you and say, that's valid, that's not valid. Who could look and tell you, you know what, it's not your teenager who's being unreasonable, you're being unreasonable. And that you have to be the adult at home, not them. And that it's not your spouse that's always wrong, you're coming with the wrong attitude. But that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means acknowledge it. Hashem did not create us to be angels. He created us to be humans, and to be human means to be imperfect. The problem is that we tell our children from the youngest age, she's perfect, just perfect. The way you are is perfect. No, you're not the way you are perfect. Far from it. Nobody's perfect the way they are. Babies are not perfect the way they are. They're perfect babies, but they're not perfect because babies are narcissists and everything is theirs. And they drive everybody else bananas, and they're cute as anything, and that's why God made them cute, so we could tolerate them and love them. But they're not perfect. Nobody is perfect. But if you tell your child, you're perfect, how dare they not put you on the A team? You're the best player, and you didn't get 100 on your exam. Your teacher is nasty. What are you telling your kids perfect? They're not perfect. You're undermining them. Because you're telling them that they should never listen to anybody who criticizes them. That's the dumbest piece of advice you could ever give a child. Of course they have to listen to criticism. Because we are created imperfect. And the only way we get a little more perfect is when we acknowledge that we are imperfect and that we have to do better. But if all we are is defending ourselves the whole day, I will not listen to any criticism of my spouse, and I will not listen to any criticism of my teenagers, and I will not listen to any criticism of my friends. Whoever criticizes me hates me. They're mean, they're disgusting, because if they really love me, they would accept me the way I am. They can accept you the way you are, and they could still tell you that you're full of it. I often say one of the gifts of having siblings, and I have quite a few of them, is they could tell you the truth in your face. They're comfortable enough in the relationship to call your bluff. And whenever I think, I start flying high and I get all excited, I could trust my siblings to just rip into me and say, like, Levi, like, cut it out. We're not buying it. You know, your community could buy it, but we're not buying it. We know you. Imanu Hayusem, you grew up with us, okay? We remember you in nappies. Don't take yourself so seriously. It actually says in the Talmud, Ein Navi Be'iroi, there is no prophet in their own city. A person could really struggle to become a prophet, in other words, to become successful in their own city. Why? Because you mean, I was your kindergarten teacher. I mean, like, seriously, like, really, you? Who do you think you are? You show up in another town as an adult, you know, you're always an adult. Nobody knows your stuff. Do you have that person, or do you alienate those people? Even if they're not doing it out of the goodness of the heart, are they right? I'll be honest, sometimes you get criticism from people who don't love you. And sometimes it's mean-spirited. But sometimes because they're looking for your faults, they're pretty good at finding them. And you can listen. Each time I open myself to listen, even if they're only 5% right, I become a better person for it. I can't do it every day. Some days, you know, I'm too tired, too run down, too buggered, too emotional. I don't think we have to call up every single day and tell a person, please criticize me. I always say the worst time to go to therapy is when you're falling apart, because then you're not really open to listen to everything. You have to, and you should go. But the best time to go to therapy is when you're in a good headspace, when you're flying. Because then you're comfortable enough within your own skin to go down very uncomfortable spaces and deal with them. The healthier you are at this moment, the more you have to be willing to listen to the truth, because only a healthy person can cope with it. If you're falling apart and you're a shmata, you won't be able to hear a word anybody tells you. But in those moments that you're ready to hear, gosh, what a gift. Somebody gives you a compliment, it lasts for a few minutes and it's nice, but they don't change you. Somebody gives you constructive criticism, they change you. I had a few weeks ago, a friend of mine, on and off, he's overseas, we don't talk that often, but we were close at some stage in our life, reached out to me and asked me to share my thoughts about an article he wanted to submit to a publication. And I read the article, and to be honest, I wasn't impressed. I knew this guy, and I knew he was capable of much more. It was a cute article, but not nearly at his capacity. And I ripped it to shreds, voice note after voice note. At some stage, I pause, you know, as I realize I'm getting really harsh, and I say, hey, listen, boy, do you want this, or do you want me to tell you it's great? He says, what are you talking about? This is Gan Eden. I want somebody to tell me the truth, because I want to be the best writer I could be. So I kept at it. And by then he threw out that article. A few weeks later, just last week, he sent me another article. And this one was a different quality entirely. This was like on par with what this guy's capable of. And other than a comment here and here that he needed a little more clarity, I was full of compliments. But for me, it wasn't about my ability to criticize. Big deal, it doesn't take genius to criticize. It was so refreshing to hear him say, Levi, pour it on. Say it the way it is. I want to hear you say it the way it is. And to have a guy tell me that was so refreshing. Because then I was able to share my honest opinion. And I believe that he became a better writer for it, because it forced him to dig deeper. And I sometimes wish I had that person. I had that editor many years ago. I had an editor who was able to tell it to me the way it is and bring out the best. I haven't had that in a while. I always tell Hashem, if he gives me that editor, I'll write my books. I need somebody that will force me to dig deep. In other words, I'll have to prove myself each day, because that will force me to not just sit and type, but rather to evoke, deeper and more eloquent thoughts. Because compliments, saying, Rov, that cheer is fantastic, it doesn't motivate. It's nice. But when somebody comes and says, Rabbi, today, I don't know what it was, you weren't on top of your game. What's going on? Interesting. Like a few months ago, somebody reached out to me and said, Rabbi, it's very nice that you post these half an hour lectures. We want short lectures. It didn't feel nice to hear it. What do you mean? I give half an hour, 40-minute lectures. That's what I do. But I listened. And after I hung up the phone and I got over my defensiveness, I said, you know what, they're right. And we started the daily 5-minute shiurim, Monday mysticism and Tuesday davening, etc. And we started the daily chumash. And that was all from one piece of criticism, not from compliments. It was constructive. They weren't coming to spite me. They were saying, listen, Rabbi, I don't have the time or the interest necessarily to listen to 40-minute lectures a week. Some people love it, so I continue it. Some people don't. But what are you interested in? That. Okay, so now I get to apply it. I would never have come up with the idea, at least not anytime soon. What's my point? My point is just listen. Have that one person in your life that could rip up your article and that you'll just say thank you. Someone who you could sit across and they'll call your bluff and they say, listen, honey, I love you to bits, but you are talking such rubbish. Because that will put up a mirror and it will allow us to grow. But it can only come if we're secure within ourselves, if we're not threatened, if we're not playing defense all day, but rather we're open. We walk into the world and we're like, okay, world, what do you have to tell me? What can I learn? I want to be a better person. And the only way I will is if somebody pushes me to do more. Where could I do more? I know I'm a great mom, but how could I do better? My dear son, my dear daughter, what part of me, what part of my behavior do you want me to work on? Again, it's not easy to listen to. But in the words of Rabbi Shalom Dober Lubavitch, he used to say, Ahovet habikoret, you should love criticism. Love it. Ki hi ta'amidcha al hagoy va'amiti, because that will take you to your greatest heights. Love it. Not the stupid criticism on social media, you idiots, how dare you. Real criticism. Sophisticated criticism, coming from a good place, coming to help you achieve excellence. What your professor did when you prepared your dissertation and they said, you could do better. I know you could do better. Each and every one of us is put into this world every day and we're called to grow. You know, a lot of videos have been going around the last 2 days about former Chief Rabbi Sachs. Unbelievable how well respected he was, and how many people, including myself, considered him one of our most influential mentors, even though I never met the guy. I don't think that, whatever, maybe was in the same room as him once. And for me, one of his incredible abilities was to constantly innovate. It's to constantly, grow. He wasn't static. Each book would innovate. Very often his books were kind of repetitive, not in a bad way, but like building on similar ideas. But as he got older, he refined his ideas. He refined them more and more and more, and was willing, instead of just saying, okay, you know what, I wrote this and there's nothing more to go, he would dig deeper and deeper. Like a gem, we could be shined and polished day in and day out, and we'll never lose any of our diamond. We'll just become brighter. So today's message, in short, find the person who will call your bluff, because they will have a bigger impact than all the flatterers and all the complimenters and all the lovey-dovey and oh my gosh, you're stunning. They're great and they're important in your life, but the person who will help you grow the most is the person who looks across you and says, you know what? I'll tell it to you the way it is. Have a great day and shkayach.